Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And while Congress must be consulted before any long-term escalation of force in Syria, I supported the missile strikes that took place earlier this month, and I hope that they serve as a warning that the United States will no longer tolerate Assad's chemical weapons attacks against innocent civilians. The missile strikes proved our willingness to use force. That's a necessary ingredient whose absence doomed any previous chance of a negotiated outcome in Syria. But I'm still very concerned about the lack of a comprehensive strategy in Syria, a problem that has stretched across both administrations, and our seeming insistence on treating the symptoms rather than the disease. And as so many of us have said over the years, it is not possible to defeat ISIS while Assad remains in power. I fear that our narrow focus on short-term tactical successes will only exacerbate the problems that we're trying to solve. So I wanted to ask you, Mr. Lister, can we hope to defeat ISIS while Assad remains in power? A lot of you spoke about what would happen if, and how does Assad's presence and tactics contribute to the growth and the narrative appeal of ISIS, as well as the al-Qaeda linked and other jihadist groups in Syria? And if Assad is not removed by countering Iran, by finding leverage with Russia or otherwise, is it possible for this conflict and its associated costs to come to an end?
Thank you very much for a really excellent question. And I think to answer it, we need to consider context as well, some historical background, but I'll stay in the immediate term for now. The reason why we've had success against ISIS, or one of the reasons why we've had success with little other negative knock-on effects up until now, is because ISIS purposefully detached itself from the other dynamics of the Syrian conflict. With the exception of about a 6-month period of time, ISIS never sought to work with the opposition. It never sought to become part of the revolution against the Assad regime. It explicitly sought to establish an Islamic State with or without help, and it would kill anyone who got in its way. And for that reason, we've been able to attack ISIS in isolation from the rest of the conflict with relative success up until now. But I think, as I hope is becoming clear, we are now seeing some of those disadvantageous knock-on effects becoming clear. For example, our NATO ally Turkey is effectively now at war with our local partner in fighting ISIS as of last night. And all of that is because, as you say, we didn't base all of this on a more holistic strategy. We didn't appreciate enough all of the broader dynamics. So that's today. In terms of Assad staying, I think the most important thing to bear in mind here is some history. In 2003, when the United States prepared to invade Iraq, as, in fact, American troops crossed on day one, the Grand Mufti then in Syria, the state-appointed, Assad-appointed Grand Mufti, issued a fatwa in which he declared it religiously obligatory on all Muslims globally to launch resistance movements in Iraq against American troops, using any means necessary, and that order was given to men and women. And that was essentially an instruction from the Assad government. Within 11 days of the US invasion of Iraq, 5,000 foreign jihadi fighters crossed into Iraq, crossed Syria's borders. They flew into Aleppo and Damascus airports, were bussed in government buses to the Iraqi border, and waved through open border crossings. And in the 7 or 8 years that followed, during the war in Iraq, it would not be an exaggeration, I think, to say that hundreds of American troops would still be alive if the Assad regime had not continued its assistance to ISIS, ISIS's predecessor movement, the Islamic State in Iraq. ISIS wouldn't be what it was today if those foreign jihadi fighters hadn't been given a free hand to train in Syria, to use Syrian government medical facilities, and then to cross Syria's borders into Iraq. And that support for jihadists didn't stop when American troops left Iraq in 2010. In 2011, whilst the Assad regime was arresting pro-democracy protesters and women and children, it was releasing jihadists from prison. 2 of the 7 founding members of the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria were released from prison at the beginning of the protests. At least 10, as far as I'm aware, of ISIS's most senior leaders in Syria were released from Assad prisons under an amnesty in 2011. And since then, it's common knowledge that, at the very least, trade in gas, trade in other resources, has continued between the Assad regime. In fact, this very government here has sanctioned several Syrian officials for facilitating those trades. So the argument is right. I know I'm taking some time, but the argument is right to say that while Assad stays in power, there is very little chance that that kind of facilitation of jihadists for Syrian goals, for Assad regime reasons, will not continue. And most importantly, the narrative for their very existence will continue to exist.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.